Here's a recording to help you with the IXL II.1 on semicolons and commas with clauses. We're going to be looking at several different sentence types here and deciding whether to put a comma or a semicolon or nothing. So the first point, sentences joined with a coordinating conjunction like and, or, but, or so. There are two things to look at here. We use a comma to separate those two complete sentences if and only if the part after the comma is the part after the conjunction is a complete sentence. So if we look at the example here, why it was reserved around new people, that can stand alone as a sentence. But there's our conjunction. These are the coordinating conjunctions are the words like and, or, but, or so. And the part after the but, he was hardly shy, could also stand alone as a sentence. It has a subject and a verb, and it finishes the thought. So as you're looking at those, check to see if the part after the conjunction could stand alone as a sentence. If it could, use the comma. If it couldn't, no comma. So you'll actually leave it blank on this IXL. You can also need a comma after a dependent clause. Now remember, an independent clause is a clause that can stand alone as a sentence, and a dependent clause still has a subject and a verb, but it can't stand alone. So we use a comma after a dependent clause if it's followed by a complete sentence. These dependent clauses usually start with a subordinating conjunction such as after, although, or because. So here's the example. Although Wyatt was reserved around new people, it still has a subject and a verb. The Wyatt and was reserved are our subject and verb, but the although makes it so it kind of leaves us hanging and needs something to finish the thought. And what it needs is the independent clause, he was hardly shy. So because the dependent clause is at the beginning, comma, we have to put the comma after it before the independent clause. If, however, it's in the other order, you could say he was hardly shy, or Wyatt was hardly shy, although he was reserved around new people. We do not need a comma between the two clauses if the dependent one is the later one. On a semicolon with closely related sentences. If you have two independent clauses where each one could stand alone, but you want to show that they're closely related to each other, then you can use a semicolon. So here, Wyatt was hardly shy, could stand alone. He was simply reserved around new people, could also stand alone, but they are related, and so we do a semicolon. I caution you in your writing to not use that too often because it really makes a careful reader stop and think, why are we showing that these sentences are closely related? But it is a good skill to know how to use when you need it. The big thing on that one is check to see that both parts can stand alone as sentences, and then you'll know that a semicolon would be okay to use there. Just a comma is not okay to use. We call that a comma splice, which is a type of run-on sentence. Okay, we can also do, very similar to that, two sentences with conjunctive adverbs. So we still have complete sentences, but we're adding a little bit to this one to show the relationship. So a word like nevertheless or consequently or however, we can, it's still two complete sentences that are closely related, but it's showing a little bit of the relationship. So Wyatt was hardly shy can stand alone. He was reserved around new people can stand alone, but the nevertheless just kind of clarifies that a little bit. So we do a semicolon and then the conjunctive adverb and then a colon after it. So Wyatt was hardly shy. Nevertheless, he was reserved around new people. So, as you're starting this exercise, the questions to ask, are there two closely related complete sentences? If the answer is yes, use a semicolon. Is there a conjunctive adverb, like however, therefore, etc.? If yes, use a semicolon before it and a comma after. Is there a conjunction, like and, but, or, so, or, etc.? If there is a conjunction, you have to ask another question. Can the part after the conjunction stand alone as a sentence? If yes, use a comma before the conjunction. If no, so if the part after the sentence doesn't have a subject and verb and finish the thought, then we leave that blank and we do not put a comma after the first clause. Is there a dependent clause or a clause that can't stand alone? It leaves you hanging at the beginning of the sentence. If there is, then we put a comma before the main clause. Remember, if the dependent clause comes after the independent clause, we do not need a comma. So here's another way to look at it. If you have, it's kind of a more mathematical way to view it. Remember, independent clause can stand alone, dependent clause cannot. So if you have an independent clause and an independent clause, you put a semicolon between them. Or independent clause, semicolon, and then the conjunctive adverb like therefore or however, an independent clause. Independent clause, comma, and independent clause, or dependent clause, comma, independent clause. If you have independent clause and then dependent clause, no punctuation is needed. Okay, I'm going to stop this video, but I am going to post another one of me walking through some of the questions in the IXL if that'll be helpful to you. So keep an eye out for that if you want more help. Where's my thing that says what to do with the video?